Ray, are we live?
Yeah, you should be fine.
Okay, thanks. Welcome to the January 26, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to ask for patience as we continue to conduct virtual meetings. There may be slight delays as we transition between speakers and presentations and participants. If any participants have issues with technology, please send a message to the moderator, Ray. Excuse me. We have 6 discussion items on our agenda today and 1 committee report. I think there's some adjustments to the agenda, but I'll get to that in a second. 2 discussion items are old business, and we have already received staff and applicant presentations on those. I would ask that we focus our attention on resolving identified outstanding issues and to be as efficient with our time as possible. I would also ask commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of all presentations and any public comment. Finally, please be recognized by the chairperson before speaking. With a full agenda of discussion items today, I would ask everyone to be efficient with their time so we can get to all items. Typically, we start each meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on items not related to the agenda. And it's my understanding that we do not have anyone signed up today. Before we get started in the consent agenda and the committee report, I just wanted to make note that item E1, case number Z3420 Lewisburg Road, the applicant has asked to defer that until our next meeting. So we will be doing that. Okay, on to the consent agenda. This is a list of requests that can be acted upon in one motion. There are 7 items on the consent agenda, 1 comprehensive plan amendment and 6 rezoning requests. Staff requests a time extension for the comprehensive plan amendment CP 320. 1 zoning case Z2720 would be automatically referred to the committee of the whole as it is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. The remaining rezoning requests would be deferred to a future meeting. With that, I would ask for a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda. Commissioner Fox.
Approve consent agenda.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Do we have a second? Commissioner Lampman? Yep. So we have a motion has been offered by Commissioner Fox to approve, and Commissioner Lampman has seconded the motion. I will ask Shanitha for a roll call and to record individual votes, and at the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome.
Madam Chair, if you'd like, since this is just a procedural, if you want to just take a show of hands, we'll reserve the roll call for when you're actually acting on a case as far as making the recommendation. That'll help move things along.
Thank you very much. So with a show of hands, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda? And it is unanimous, so it passes. Moving on to the committee report. The Text Change Committee met and discussed TC 1420, which is a staff initiative to amend the community garden regulations. This is in response to a citizen request to allow on-site sales of agricultural products at a community garden. The committee discussed this item on January 19th, and they had recommend approval unanimously. I would ask the chairperson of the committee to give an update and offer a motion. CJ?
Thanks, Commissioner. I'll keep this short and to the point. So on January 19th, the Text Change Committee, as you talked about, we reviewed actually 2 text amendments to the UDO. We won't talk about the second one, which was TC 1620, dealing with floodplain development regulations. We held that case at the table because we wanted to get some more information from staff. So we'll circle back on that one next time we meet. But TC 1420, as you said, deals with community gardens with on-site sales. As you said, the text change committee voted unanimously to move TC 1420 to the full planning commission to be voted on. And at this time, I can make a motion if that suits you.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, so I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated January 26, 2021, containing our agenda materials for today, and recommend approval for the text for the zoning text amendment. The following policy statements contained in the 2030 comprehensive plan have been considered relevant to this approval. Policy CS 5.10, healthy food options. Policy EP 9.5, promoting local products. Policy EP 9.6, local produce and farmers markets, and Action EP 9.4, local food systems. This action is taken action is responsible, is reasonable, and in the public interest, because the request will result in the ordinance language that will create a set of standards to allow the on-site sales in association with a community garden as a limited use. That is my motion.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Mann. Commissioner Haver.
Second.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second to approve TC 1420. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call.
Yes, good morning. All right, Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Fox,
Aye.
Vice Chair Hicks,
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman,
Aye.
Commissioner Mann.
Aye.
Let's see, Commissioner Miller is not here, right? Correct?
Correct.
All right, Commissioner O'Haver.
Aye.
All right, and Commissioner Winters.
Aye.
Okay, the vote is unanimous and it passes. Moving on to old business, as I stated before, case Z34 20 Lewisburg Road will be deferred until, without objection, will be deferred until our next meeting on February 9th. So we will move on to the next case, which is case number Z4320 Trailwood Drive. This is a request to rezone approximately 11 acres of land from planned development to residential 10 conditional use. This request was discussed at our last meeting and deferred to allow the applicant to modify the zoning conditions. The applicant has revised the zoning conditions. I would like to ask staff for a brief update on the revised conditions. Matt Clem will present on behalf of staff.
Good morning, Planning Commission. Can you hear me fine?
We can hear you.
Okay, great, thanks. So at your last meeting, you requested an extension on your timeline, and City Council granted that extension, so your new deadline for action is March 11th. Next slide. So there have been a number of changes to the zoning conditions. The conditions are shown here. What's underlined is what has changed. The density has been reduced to 6.7 units per acre, or a total of 75 units on the property. They have increased the open space set aside from 40 to 50%. Condition 3 has not changed. Condition 4 has been amended to be an undisturbed buffer. It was a planting yard that was proposed in that 20-foot wide area, but the applicants have now said they'll leave the existing landscaping in place, so those mature trees that you've seen in the images and that are on the property today. Those will be left in that undisturbed buffer. And the building setback to the property to the south, which is the Beard property, has been increased from 50 to 100 feet for the placement of apartment buildings on the property. So that's been increased as well. Next slide. These are two completely new zoning conditions. The first one limits impervious surfaces on the site to 35%. I believe under the ordinance, they would otherwise be allowed to have 65% coverage. So it's a reduction to 35%. And then that second condition limits lot coverage in the floodway fringe. You've seen this before. This is consistent with an upcoming text change that stormwater staff is working on. So it's not required now, but the applicants are agreeing to do that before that text change comes through. So this is consistent with that language. Next slide. You can see here changes to entitlement, again, going down to 6.7 units per acre, a total of 75 units with a 100-foot side yard setback to the Beard property. Next slide. The reduction in zoning, or excuse me, residential entitlement to 6.7 units per acre is consistent with the low density residential designation, which supports up to 6 units per acre. So it is closer to that. It could be more squarely consistent with the designation if they reduced it by an additional 7 units. But the slight increase over what is recommended by 0.7 units is still in line with the intent of that designation in terms of bulk and spacing, and certainly in density. Also, the low density residential designation would support multifamily housing in a conservation development option when a significant amount of open space is set aside. And that is what's happening on this property. 50%, as you know, of the property is being set aside and no or limited lot coverage in the floodplain. So it's consistent with that designation. Next slide. Again, just looking consistent overall, future land use. Next. Just showing new policies that came into the case in response to the changes in zoning conditions about stormwater impacts and floodplain conservation, and of course the future land use map and zoning consistency. Next slide. Next slide. And again, your deadline for action is March 11th, and I know outstanding issues. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So we have already received an applicant presentation and heard from the members of the public on this request. We do have 2 members of the public signed up to speak on this today. So if there's a desire from the commission to hear from them, I'm seeing yes. So without further objection, I'd like to grant 4 minutes for the applicant and 4 minutes for those signed up to speak to be able to speak. Isabel Maddox is present and to present on behalf of the applicant.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Isabel Maddox, members of the Planning Commission. P.O. Box 946. I'm here today on behalf of Capital Associates and Fuller Land Development, the co-developers. On the line with me today are Tom Huff of Capital Associates, Jim Anderson of Fuller Land Development, Don Curry, our civil engineer, and Reinald Stevenson, our traffic engineer. I want to thank the Planning Commission for their input at the last meeting. We believe we've made significant positive changes to this case, and I think it's very important to note that we are now deemed consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. I won't go over the new conditions, but I will stress a couple of those. One, we have had a 25% reduction in our density to get down to 75 units, and we've increased natural areas. We've enhanced our buffer by making the undisturbed buffer 20 feet and 100-foot building separation, and also have agreed to restrict development in the floodplain. I have a graphic. If you'll go to Exhibit 4, right here that I want to go through. This sort of gives you a graphic representation of what this, if you stand on Trailwood Drive, what this will look like. And you'll see the Beard residence is on the far left, and you'll see some existing trees. You'll see that property line sort of in the middle, and we'll preserve some existing tall trees. And then we'll come forward with some planted areas. We'll have a two-tiered retaining wall. You see how it steps down a little bit, which we'll be planting on both tops of both of those tiers. And then you'll get down to the project where we'll have trees and you see the building. So you see that in no way does this building dwarf the one single family resident that we're adjacent to. And I think that shows a pretty good graphic representation of how the apartment will relate to the one house that we are adjacent to. Then I want to go to the next slide. This is sort of also standing on Trailwood. It gives you kind of a view of the vegetation across our whole frontage. And you'll see in the far left, we have the buffer lands and the landscaping area, followed by, you'll see the cuts, which are the access points. You'll see street trees that'll come along in front of the new buildings. And then you'll go to the right and you'll see existing trees. And you'll see that the majority of the frontage will retain the existing trees. And for those areas where they'll be removed, there'll be new plantings put in. So we feel like these two graphics show well exactly kind of what the environment will be. And it won't, when you drive into Trailwood Drive, it will not look drastically different than it does today. I also wanted to mention that we had talked about this a little bit earlier, that there is currently a 12 single family lot plan approved. And we've analyzed the comparisons environmentally. This is Exhibit 8, I believe. We've analyzed the environmental impacts of this development.
Isabel, I think we
Pardon? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
repeat a little bit there. Oh, your
Okay.
connection dropped off.
I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. So this is the 12 lot subdivision that is in current approval, current entitlement, and we've compared that to our development, and we find it to be that we'll be preserving more open space. They have a 30-foot setback from the Beard lot, whereas we have 100 feet, and we have restricted development in the floodplain, and in terms of land disturbance, we think they're similar between the two developments. So I think we're serving 75 households and they're serving 12. We think it's a much better use of natural resources. There has been talk about townhouses. We have found that we can only get 22 townhouses on this site. And we don't think that's enough density to take advantage of the many walkable amenities in this area. Traffic, we've talked about before, but our traffic, and if we move on to slide number 8, you'll see that traffic has dropped even further. The additional trips are 26 in the AM, 30 in the PM. That is one car per 2 minutes. It's actually a little bit less than that, coming or going. And so if you sit in your car for 2 minutes and think about how long that is, that's the amount of new traffic that this project will bring. It's really not significant. Well, to sum up, can I go to the last slide just to sum up the bullets? That's a general. We're consistent with the plan, FLUM, and the comprehensive plan. We're adding housing diversity. We're walkable. We're protecting the floodplain, and we are providing a nice buffer to the single family. There are no detriments or outstanding issues as determined by staff, either stormwater or traffic or otherwise. Thank you. And we do have our experts are here to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. There are 2 people signed up to speak on this matter. Ray, can you queue up the first person?
Yes, Madison Beard was first. She had to leave for work. She asked to yield her time to the other speaker, Tom Kwok. So I'll unmute him now.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Hicks. I'm Tom Kwok. I live at 1333 Trailwood Drive down the street from the planned development, and I'm representing the Trailwood community of 52 households that live adjacent to this site. I suggest, and our neighborhood is in complete agreement on this, that the case should be rejected strictly for environmental concerns alone. The property consists of steep, old-growth forest on a hillside over fragile wetlands and Walnut Creek and the Raleigh Greenway. Walnut Creek at this point drains into Lake Raleigh less than a mile downstream, and Lake Raleigh is already becoming degraded. You voted to protect the upstream property from development in case Z2020, and this parcel has all the same environmental qualities and fragile ecosystem that property did. The applicant is developing the downstream property into 110 apartments and a swimming pool and parking through legacy zoning. They've clear cut that property, removed the hillside, and have been cited by the city for environmental violations. It's clear these properties cannot be developed without serious environmental damage. The same fate for this property is in store if you approve this. And I've sent some images to you showing the type of development planned. In addition, the blind entryway and exits to the property on this steep hill are traffic hazards. We have plenty of accidents that we live with each year along this stretch of highway because of the steep hill. Finally, there's a fairness issue in that we in the community negotiated a planned development with a previous developer. We compromised then as much as we could, and the development was to be LEED certified green homes built among the trees in the woods rather than removing the hillside as planned with this project. It was not developed because of an unexpected death of the developer, and there are other developers interested in developing the property within the planned development. Now we're asked again to compromise to R10. It's a moving target for rezoning, and we wonder what's to come of this property next. So for environmental reasons, traffic safety, and fair governance, we, the 52 households in the Trailwood community, respectfully ask you to deny this case. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, I would now like to allow for questions and comments from commissioners. Does anybody have questions or comments? Commissioner Lampman.
Was there a new site rendering showing the overall footprint with the trail and all the additions?
Hey, this is Matt. I don't believe that was included in the presentation materials from Ms. Maddox. I can flip through them real quick and see if there's an updated version, if you give me just a second. But while I'm digging it up, if there's other questions, we can take those too.
Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hicks. My primary concern is the environmental impact. And I recall last week, or at our last meeting, we saw a picture of a property under development downstream from here that was flooded. And I recall the developer saying that flooding wasn't a result of their development, it was a result of the upstream development and the water coming downstream, ending up there. So I'm wondering if this development wouldn't contribute to what's coming from upstream and affecting properties like that one and other downstream properties. I did note that Ms. Maddox said that they had looked at what's currently approved, and it sounded like she said that the impact of what they're proposing would be less severe than what's approved. Can someone from staff, maybe stormwater or someone, confirm that? is this proposed development less of an environmental impact, particularly in terms of stormwater, than the approved development?
Hey, Madam Chair, this is Matt again. I just want to respond to Commissioner Lampman's question for an updated site plan. I didn't see one of those in the presentation materials that we had, so I don't have one. The applicant may if they want to share. And then to Commissioner Bennett, we have stormwater staff on hand, and they can speak to what the difference would or could be between the existing zoning and the proposed. But I would like to also just comment on the images that were shared that showed the red clay and silt runoff. I think what's happening there is a result of the temporary condition of construction. And so when grading is done and trees are removed, you have bare earth that is washed away in a storm event. And much of it is captured on site with temporary silt fence and the like during the construction process. But construction can take a long time, a year or two, sometimes more for a project like that. But once it's done and the earth is stabilized and planted and re-landscaped, that red clay silt runoff would no longer be an issue. And so I just want to point that out. And Ben Brown, if he can be unmuted, if you want to speak to that, or additionally to the question of what the impact of zoning for the existing 12 houses, the difference or potential difference to what the zoning for these apartment buildings would be.
Good morning. Hope everybody can hear me. This has been Brown. As far as the downstream site that was cited by city staff, they actually, the portion of their property that flooded and caused the issue downstream was actually in the FEMA designated floodplain, because they were allowed under code to develop 50% of the floodplain. And so that's where they ran into the area, because Walnut Creek itself flooded during that storm event, and that's where their issues came from. So this development, not doing any development within the FEMA regulated floodplain, would help stop some of that. Also, their impervious maximum that they're putting in is more than the zoning has today. I can't really speak to the grading of the two different proposals, because neither proposal really had any sort of grading plan approved with them, or any conditions approved with the previous PD as far as grading. And so I can't really speak to what the proposed grading plan for the apartments versus the single family subdivision is. But if they are grading more of that slope, that could be an issue going forward.
Commissioner Bennett?
So thank you, Ben. Can I follow up? You said the impervious maximum is more with the proposed development than the approved one. I think that's what you said. Can you explain that, please?
Sorry, that was a misspeak on my point. I'm only halfway through my coffee. It's more strict than the previous rezoning case.
Oh, okay.
The impervious maximum.
Just to clarify, that means that there will be less impervious surface under the proposed zoning than is currently permitted under existing zoning. More of the site would be pervious and unpaved.
Okay.
Sorry, Commissioner Haver?
I am, well, let me just say I walked the site yesterday for about an hour. And I want to acknowledge Mr. Clark and Ms. Beard's concerns. I think seeing the reduction in units, the additional buffer, the 100-foot setback, the consistency with low density residential, 50% set aside, consistency now with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map, I'm ready to make a motion to recommend approval. . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . .
Okay, so is that a motion?
I'll make the motion. I was just giving, if somebody.
Okay. Is there any further discussion from
There you go.
commissioners?
There you go.
Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. I just want to make sure I understand and that I'm making a sound decision when I vote. So one of the callers, I think it was Dr. Kwok, mentioned that a similar rezoning Z 2020, we voted, I guess, to deny that one because of environmental concerns. Does anyone remember what that one is? I'm just trying to remember the similarities between, is that one like comparable to this one?
Sorry, I think that's probably a good question for staff, but I believe that one was asking for rezoning in an area that was currently zoned conservation management.
Oh, okay, it was that one. Okay, I remember that one. Okay. So there was no development there and it was zoned to be preserved, conserved, and someone was trying to develop in it. I remember that. Thank you.
Welcome. I just had one comment. I heard the applicant say that the frontage will retain the existing trees except for where there's entry into the site. I don't remember reading that in the reports. I just wanted to make sure I had heard that correctly. I guess that's a question for the applicant.
Can we unmute Ms. Maddox, please? Are you still with us?
Yeah,
Isabel?
I'm here. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Much of that, the trees that you saw in that graphic on my exhibit. Let's see, what exhibit was it? I think it was 6. No, excuse me, 5. Yeah, much of those trees on the right side, many of those are in the floodplain, and so our floodplain condition would preserve those. And then the street trees in the middle would be required by the city. And then we have our buffer and some landscaping over on the left side.
Thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Bennett.
One last question. Has the community seen the revised conditions and do they feel better about this proposal over the last one? Or are the emails that we're receiving continuing to oppose the rezoning in response to the revised conditions?
This is Tom Kwok. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
We met online with the applicant, and they described they didn't use that graphic, which I think sure shows a lot more trees than will be apparent after they clear cut the property. And we learned about some of these conditions, and then we agreed to meet with the developer on site 2 days later to discuss further negotiations. But at that time, they were filing the conditions as we were meeting. So there was really no further negotiating to do. We were proposing staying off that very steep old growth hillside, reducing the density to 50 units, which would allow them to stay out of the floodplain and keep from removing that hillside with the old growth forest on it. In the current plan, they plan to go in there, remove the hillside. There'll be over a 20-foot cliff on the edge of the Beard property. And that's what results in all this erosion and terrible damage to Walnut Creek and Lake Raleigh. We had suggested that a reduction to about 50 units to stay out of the floodplain and off of that steep hillside. And they could not agree to that. So the community stands in opposition, mainly because of environmental reasons, but other reasons as well. I'd also just like to say that our agreement with the previous developer was not to allow any hillside removal and to build those greenhouses within the woods and retain the buffering and hydraulic capacity of that hillside. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, seeing no, Commissioner Lampman.
I just wanted to see if the applicant had an updated site plan, and just to confirm that the trail is alongside the frontage, basically like a sidewalk to the greenway.
Yes, we have not developed a new site plan. We've done some schematics, but we didn't really have anything that was ready to be reviewed by the Planning Commission today. But I do want to note that the currently approved plan will grade that hillside. I mean, they're showing home sites 30 feet away from the Beard property. So I don't know that they can possibly do that without significant grading of the hillside. So I'm sorry we don't have a new plan for you, Commissioner Lampman, but we will be fitting our units into the area that is not in the floodplain.
Commissioner Lampman.
May I second Commissioner O'Haver's motion?
Just as soon as he makes his motion.
Oh, I thought he did. I'm sorry.
No, Commissioner O'Haver.
I was just trying to make sure my fellow commissioners had an opportunity to ask any additional questions. So
Thank you.
I would like to move to recommend approval of rezoning case Z 4320, seeing that it's consistent with the comprehensive plan, the future land use map. The rezoning request is reasonable in the public interest because it is supported by these specific policies. LU 1.2, future land use map and zoning consistency. LU 5.6, buffering requirements. H 1.8, zoning for housing. EP 4.2, floodplain conservation, and PR 3.13, greenway oriented development.
Commissioner Lampman.
Second.
Okay. Commissioner O'Haver has offered a motion to approve, and Commissioner Lampman has seconded the motion. If there's no further discussion, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Nay.
Commissioner Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Hicks, Vice Chair Hicks, I'm sorry.
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Mann?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
And Commissioner Winters?
Nay.
Thank you.
So that's 6 votes aye and 2 votes nay. I'm sorry, 5 votes aye and 2 votes nay. Do the 2 nay votes if they would like to make a statement as to why they voted nay, they could do so at this time. If you don't want to, that's fine. Commissioner Bennett.
Yes, I voted nay primarily because of the potential for environmental impact. And I just didn't have enough information to satisfy myself that this would be less impactful than what is currently zoned. I found Dr. Kwok's email quite compelling. And so I just didn't hear anything to convince me that this would not exacerbate downstream flooding. And I try to be consistent in the way I vote. And I have voted against projects that I thought were going to exacerbate downstream flooding. So I'm being consistent. I also think I want to be careful when we're voting to recommend changing something that a community has gone through an engagement process and has come to an agreement on. We had another case with this where there's a plan in place and then somebody else comes along and wants to do something different once the community has already negotiated in good faith to have a plan in place that they're comfortable with. I don't feel good about changing that plan to something that they are unanimously opposed to without some sort of compelling reason. And I didn't find this proposed development gave me that compelling reason.
Thank you. Okay. If with no further comment, then we will move on to the next case. We move now on to new business portion of the agenda. These are that have not appeared on a previous planning commission agenda. And there are 6 rezoning requests and 1 text change, and 1 text change to zoning conditions for discussion today. The first case is case number Z4620 Creedmoor Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 2.4 acres of land from residential 4 to commercial mixed use, 3 stories, conditional use. Hannah Rekha will present on behalf of staff.
Good morning. As you mentioned, 46 is a request to rezone just over 2 acres from R4 to CX3CU. You requested an extension to your review time at your last meeting, so the deadline for action is now March 11th. The rezoning site is in a predominantly residential area. Most of the area east and west of Creedmoor Road is also zoned R4, but there is some mixed-use zoning along this portion of Creedmoor Road, including OX parcels to the south, and then some CX and IX property zoned IX and CX to the north. Next slide. So for context, this is located North Raleigh, south of the intersection of Lynn Road and Creedmoor Road. The site is across the street from Jeffreys Grove Elementary School. As I mentioned, areas to the east and west of this part of Creedmoor Road are mainly low-density residential. And there is office uses located south of the site along Creedmoor Road and some commercial uses near the intersection with Lynn Road. Next slide. So this is a close-up of the site. It includes 6 parcels. Each are either undeveloped or have a detached house currently located on them. The next slide. These are some views of the site from Creedmoor Road. As you can see, it's partially forested. A few of the lots have a detached house with direct access onto Creedmoor Road. Next slide. There are 2 proposed zoning conditions. One would limit the permitted uses down to just 3, office, medical, and self-service storage. The second would limit the size of medical or office uses to 20,000 square feet. So the existing zoning, R4, would permit only residential uses, no more than 4 dwelling units per acre. The requested district, because of those proposed conditions, would not permit residential uses at all, or other commercial uses such as retail. And then the permitted commercial uses, including office, would be capped for the conditions as well. Next slide. So the rezoning site is designated on the future land use map as office and residential mixed use. CX district is typically not consistent with that designation. But again, the proposed conditions limit the site down, the permitted uses down, so that the entitlement is fairly similar to an OX district. And for that reason, the requested conditional use district is consistent with the future land use map. Next slide shows there's no urban form guidance for the rezoning site. The following slide. See, overall, the request is consistent with a 2030 comprehensive plan. And again, that does include the future land use map designation of office and residential mixed use. The next slide will show some of the consistent policies. They include managing impacts of commercial development and limiting single-family lots on major streets. There was one inconsistent policy, zoning for housing, and that has to do with the requested district not allowing residential uses. Is a policy that wants to see residential entitlement increase generally. And that is the end of staff presentation. The new deadline is March 11th, and I can answer any questions.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Jamie Schwadler, who's representing the applicant. The applicant and all those in support have 10 minutes to speak. And I'm being told that my connectivity is not great and that I'm going in and out a little bit. So while the applicant presents, I'm going to log off and log back on real quick. Okay. See you in a sec. Thanks. Ms. Schwadler.
Good morning. This is Laura Good with Parker Poe. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thank you. And I will be representing the applicant. I am Jamie Schwadler's colleague at Parker Poe. Good morning, Vice Chair and Commissioners. Again, Laura Good with Parker Poe. My business address is 301 Fayetteville Street. Also here on the line and available for questions this morning is Amber Fairley. She is with Band F Consulting, who is the site plan and engineer for the case. Next slide, please. Hannah did a great job of explaining exactly where the site is located in relation to adjacent uses in the area, and this aerial shows that as well. Again, this is a request to rezone 6 parcels from R4 to CX3CU, about 2.8 acres here. We have proposed the 2 conditions to limit the principal uses to office, medical, and self-service storage, and then an additional condition to limit medical or office uses to 20,000 square feet to mitigate any traffic that would be generated from those uses. Next slide, please. This slide shows how the proposed uses of office, medical, and self-storage are compatible with the existing uses in the area. So as Hannah mentioned, there is significant single-family residential uses in the area. However, along this stretch of Creedmoor Road, which is a major roadway, it is a 4-lane avenue divided. There are a mix of uses along the stretch of the road, and including the office park to the south, which is zoned OX3CU, as well as the mixed uses to the north. You've got the IX3CU and the CX5 to the north, and then directly to the west, you've got, although it's zoned residential, you've got the Jeffreys Grove Elementary School and the Creedmoor Baptist Road to the southwest. Next slide, please. This slide shows the future land use map designation of office and residential mixed use. And this flume designation is primarily for properties located along major streets like Creedmoor Road, where low density residential uses are no longer appropriate. It also contemplates a mix of residential and office uses and generally limits uses to 4 stories. So this request is consistent with this flume designation, as the CX3CU zoning district we are seeking will limit building height of any proposed use to 3 stories, which is under that 4-story contemplated height. It will allow for a mix of uses, including office use, which is contemplated in this flume designation. And it allows for a mix of uses on these properties, which are more appropriate along the stretch of Creedmoor Road than single-family residential. Next slide, please. So we did hold 2 neighborhood meetings as part of this rezoning case. And at these meetings, we mainly discussed the building height designation and how that was selected, the UDO requirements for building setbacks and buffers, as well as kind of site plan layout, parking, location. And then one of the other things we discussed was how stormwater would be managed at the site. So importantly, there were no complaints about existing stormwater issues. There were some notes from residents about past illegal dumping of materials into stormwater, but it was not related to actual stormwater issues in this area. So basically, we explained the UDO requirements for us to treat and detain stormwater on the site for the 2 and 10-year flood events, and also explained that due to the site topography, which you can see from this GIS screenshot here, stormwater here will be detained and slowly released to the south of the property into existing stormwater drainage facilities that are located along Creedmoor Road, which you can see in red there along the southwest of the site. That eventually crosses east along Bramblewood Drive between Flagstone Place and Cayuga Place. We did confirm with staff that there have been no downstream stormwater complaints in the last 6 years, and no complaints of prior structural flooding either. And then once we explained, the UDO requirements for detention and treatment of stormwater, there were no other concerns raised at the neighborhood meetings. Next slide, please. So finally, this slide shows, as staff notes, that this request is consistent with numerous comprehensive plan policies, including consistency with the flume designation with our conditions that limit the building height and limit the uses, how it will manage commercial development impacts to adjacent residential uses, and will have an appropriate scale and design for new commercial uses at the site, given the proposed conditions, as well as the required protective yards between the permitted uses and the residential uses. So we thank you for your time this morning. We are here to answer any questions. Again, Amber Farrelly, who is the site planner and engineer for the site, is here as well. But at this time, we're happy to answer any questions, and we would like to reserve our remaining time to respond to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Hold on a second. So now I'd like to allow, let's see, I understand that there are no people signed up to speak on this matter. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. So then I would now like to allow for questions and comments from commissioners. Does anybody have any questions or comments? If so, please be recognized to speak. Commissioner Fox.
A question for staff. Is self-service storage generally considered consistent with the office residential mixed-use flume designation?
Yeah, the self-service storage is I think considered an industrial use, I believe, and not usually. I mean, there's a range of uses in that industrial category. Some, like self-service storage and research and development, have a different impact, or less impactful than others. So that is one that is not squarely consistent with OR&M usually.
Commissioner Fox.
A follow-up on that for the applicant. Have you considered additional buffering or any other way to mitigate for the potential use of self-service storage at that location?
Hi, this is Laura. Good. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, thanks for the question. We have not considered any additional buffering at this time based on feedback from the community. That was not a concern that was raised. There is substantial buffering that is required for self-service use, not only with the transitional yards that are required between the mixed use and the residential development to the east. You've got additional yards that are into the code. But additionally, if a self-service storage was to be used, type B1 or B2 yard would be required on those property lines.
Apologize if you covered this when I was on and off. But what is the intention of the development of the site if it's self-storage? Will it be self-contained or individual units?
Hi, again, this is Laura Good. Thank you for that question, Vice Chair Hicks. So the exact use has not been determined yet for the site. That's why we've left it open for either office, medical, or self-service storage, just to be kind of determined as the market, dictates at the time of development. However, if self-service is selected or is a mix of use, including self-storage, it is required to be self-contained by the code. So it will not be individual. It will be contained within a building, and it will all be self-contained in a single building.
Would you be willing to condition for a fully shielded light fixture?
And I apologize, Vice Chair Hicks, I was not able to hear your full question. Could you repeat that?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, not having great connectivity today. So the question was if you would be willing to condition to have a fully shielded light fixture as a way to, recognize that there's residential nearby.
Sure. So that is not something that's been raised before. I can certainly ask the developer if that's something we are willing to discuss. If you could give me a chance to speak.
Sure. Are there any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Lampman.
Not really sure how to frame this question, and it might be more of a discussion with staff or other commissioners. When it comes to self-service storage, I see a lot of that product like along Glenwood, which provides, the higher traffic corridor. Now, granted, Creedmoor is 4 lanes, but it's right across from a elementary school and down this road from retail, and then there are medical offices nearby, and then there's residential adjacent. It seems as though self-service storage would be kind of an anomaly for the area. It doesn't really seem to make sense to me.
Commissioner Lampman, this is Laura Good. There is an existing self-storage facility just to the north at that intersection of Linwood and Lynn Road and Creedmoor. So this is a type of use that's already in the area.
Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. I was just going to add that I don't live very far from this site, and I travel Creedmoor fairly regularly. And Creedmoor is a real hodgepodge of land uses. I don't think anything is an anomaly. I mean, there was a oil change place, that was recently done. So there's all sorts of stuff, self-storage, gas stations, medical office. So I don't think the self-storage building would really be that much of an anomaly. I think there are other land uses that, at least to me, stand out as a lot odder than a building, a self-contained storage unit.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett. I see, it looks like there's no further comment. I would like to give a chance for the Representative Laura Good to condition for full light fixtures.
Vice Chair Hicks, we can't hear you at all.
See? Okay. Let's see. Can you hear me now? Yes. So I'm going to try to dial in here in a second, but if maybe I can get my question out. The question was just to circle back around to the applicant, Representative Laura Good, about the full cutoff light fixtures.
Hi, Vice Chair Hicks. I think if I
hear
hear
me.
you correct, no, I can hear you bits and pieces. So I think if what you're asking is you wanted to give me a chance to respond to your question about whether the applicant would be willing to commit to an additional condition on shielding of the light fixtures. And so I think the first thing I would say is that we do have that 50-foot transition yard that's going to be required. So I'm not sure how much the light fixture shielding would help. But certainly if that's something that this commission feels strongly about, that's certainly something we are willing, to commit to as a new condition within 50 feet of the property line. But we would ask that the commission kind of vote through, and we could take that commission to the council.
So thank you for that. Can you hear me now? Okay, I was suggested I turn off my video. So hopefully that'll help. Thank you for that suggestion. So I think typically our preference is to send cases to council with any conditions or adjustments to the case completed before we send it on. So that's what my preference would be to do. What's the pleasure of the commission? If anybody has any comments differently than that, I'd entertain that. Seeing none.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Hicks. Yeah, that's what we normally do. Our standard operation is to have all of the conditions prior to moving the case forward to the council.
Correct.
Yes, in
Okay.
general, it doesn't save you time to move it forward without the conditions, because then the council simply has to delay it 2 weeks when they receive it to get the conditions in before public hearing. So it's just, I think, cleaner and easier for everyone to understand if you hold it for 2 weeks. The impact on the public hearing date is the same.
Yep. Thank you very much for that. And I apologize with my choppy connection. I think what I heard Ms. Good say was that that's something that they would be willing to add as a condition. And so with that in mind, without further objection, without any objection, we will hold this case at the table to allow for that additional condition. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for bearing with me with my technical issues. The next case is item F2, case number Z5020 Pleasant Grove Church Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 3 acres of land from residential 4 to residential 10 conditional use. And Jason Harden will present on behalf of staff.
All right, good morning, everybody. So this is the first time that this rezoning has been on the agenda, but hasn't been up for presentation and discussion. So I'll go through the particulars of the request. The zoning map that you can see there, you can see a mix of residential zoning districts on the site and in the area, residential 4 on the site and to the north, and residential 6, R6 to the south, and then portions of the east and west of the site, R10 a little bit further south of Millbrook Road, and some mixed use zoning at the intersection of Millbrook and Glenwood Avenue, which is just a little bit further to the west. And the R6, I would note, is, for the most part, townhouses on the south and portions of the east and west. Next slide, please. So a little bit of a closer look at the zoning. And again, request here is from residential 4 to residential 10, 10 units to the acre. Next slide, please. An aerial view, again, seeing the largely residential uses in the vicinity, Millbrook and Glenwood, the commercial node here. A little bit more of a look at the, again, the more detached houses to the north, and then townhouses and other multifamily residential to the south and to the west. Next slide. So a few views looking toward or into the site. All of these are from Pleasant Grove, Church Road, so the top two looking east and looking west to the site, which is currently wooded. There was a single detached house on the site, which has since been removed, so currently wooded and vacant. And then the last photo on the bottom left is looking directly into the site. Next slide. One condition, which is outdoor sports and entertainment facility, that's a use that is permitted in residential districts. The condition would not permit that here. So next slide. A comparison of the existing versus the proposed zoning. So again, R4, 4 units to the acre, to R10 with that one condition. That's the CU. A little bit more than 3 acres. A maximum units possible, just the math there gives you 12 with the current zoning and 30 with the proposed zoning. Setbacks change somewhat between those two zoning districts. So currently 20 feet minimum front setback, 10 on the sides and 30 on the rear. With the proposed zoning, 10 feet in the front, and then depending on the housing type, 5 feet on the sides for a detached house. It would be 6 feet for a townhouse or apartment on the sides that are adjacent to existing detached houses. Obviously, the townhouses could have 0 feet separation between an individual unit, and then 20 feet on the rear. Next slide. So always look at carbon emissions and some other metrics in terms of analyzing a rezoning. So in this case, part of it is looking at walkability and transit use. So very slightly lower walk score than the average city score, and transit as well. So essentially not more likely to have walking trips or transit trips than anywhere else in the city. However, it does permit more energy efficient types of housing. Townhouses and apartments tend to have substantially lower carbon emissions because they're more efficient building types, sharing walls and or ceilings. So overall, the rezoning by permitting those would be likely to decrease per capita carbon emissions. Next slide. In terms of affordability, it would add to the housing supply, which is a key element of that. Does not include any provisions for any specific income targets or subsidies in the rezoning. Permits a variety of housing types and more housing choice. Does permit smaller lots if detached houses are ultimately built here than the city average. And is within, it's a rather distant, but potential walking distance of transit, about 3/4 of a mile. So it does allow building types such as townhouses that tend to be relatively more affordable than new units and detached houses. Again, that's not to say that they would be affordable at a specific income level, but in comparison to a detached house. Next slide. So the future land use map is one of the key policy maps for analyzing a rezoning. In this case, the property and the adjacent areas to the west and south are designated moderate density residential, which does envision development that could include townhouses or similar housing types up to 14 units per acre. Request here would limit development to 10 units per acre. So it's squarely consistent with that moderate density residential designation. Next slide. The urban form map, which is a guide to development in terms of walkability and how buildings address the street. It does not have a designation here in this more residential part of North Raleigh. So overall, consistent with the future land use map, as noted, no urban format designation, consistent overall with the comprehensive plan and with several specific policies, which are outlined on the next slide. So the future land use map, compact development, infill development, which support looking at vacant properties and supporting more compact development in those areas, as long as generally consistent with the future land use map. Greenhouse gas reduction, noting the carbon analysis from the previous slides. Zoning for housing, which encourages, as Raleigh is a place with high levels of housing demand, providing additional housing supply and housing choice, which this rezoning would provide. No outstanding technical issues. Again, this is the first time that it's been on the agenda for action, but because there were some deferrals, the deadline for action is February 2nd. And that's all I have. Happy to answer any questions. I know we have a number of people here to comment on the proposal as well.
Thank you very much. And if for some reason I get choppy again, raise your hand or someone alert me. Next, we will hear from Molly Stewart representing the applicant, and the applicant and all those in support have 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hicks and Commissioners. Good morning. This is Molly Stewart, Morningstar Law Group, representing the applicant. I also have with me today Cliff Minsley. He is a part of the applicant team and will speak briefly once I've concluded my presentation. We also have with us available for questions Dwayne Dixon and Katerina Dima from the applicant team, as well as John Frazier from FLM Engineering, depending on the types of questions that come up today. So because the zoning itself is straightforward, as you just heard, and it represents the contemplated residential use and proposing a maximum density that's in the middle of the range recommended by the future land use map, I'm going to kind of skip over that part and just provide a little bit of background on the progression of development in the surrounding area and how that has happened. Next slide, please. And I'll just stick with this slide today. So, you know, as Jason mentioned, the future land use map designates the area for moderate density residential, shown in the darker yellow on the map. And just a little bit of history. The first area within that darker yellow area to develop here on the map was to the southwest of the site, and that's the area is occupied by townhomes, and those were developed in the early 1980s. About 1 to 2 years later, the single-family homes to the north there along Pleasant Grove Church Road came along, and so that's how we got those the single-family homes. Then in the mid-1990s, some additional townhomes were built to the south and east of the property, and that sort of completed the donut hole with the other surrounding single-family homes that are in that lower density residential. Those were completed in the interim. So we ended up there by the mid-1990s. We had this donut hole with townhomes kind of on the three sides and some existing single-family residential as well. So that's how we got where we are today and kind of how this request fits in for that R10 maximum density. And so with that, I will turn it over to Cliff Minsley, representing the applicant team, to say a few words about the team and about the project. Steph, has Cliff been unmuted?
Yep. Cliff, are you there?
I think Cliff may be having some technical
So I can also unmute Katerina.
troubles today. If you could unmute Dwayne Dixon and Katerina Dima, and we can ask them if one of them would like to speak.
They're all currently unmuted.
Dwayne or Katerina, would you like to say a few words?
Is anybody able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, this is Cliff Minsley. Just want to confirm you can hear me.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about the technical difficulties, but good morning and thank you for your time. Like Molly's introduction, my name is Cliff Minsley. I'm local here to Raleigh, and I'm joined by Dwayne Dixon and Katerina Dema as my partners on this project. We also obviously have Molly Stewart, who's representing us from Zoning Council, John Fraser from FLM. As Molly outlined, we are a local residential developer. Our intent for the site would be a residential development. We feel that the site was a great candidate for a project that we'd like to do, given it is surrounded by townhomes and homes that would be akin to what we would propose building. We were attracted to the area as we thought that the home prices were also consistent with the type of product that we propose. And we also recognize that the site is consistent with the future land use plan for growth and Raleigh's plan for growth. And so to us, it seemed like a pretty cut and dry site. We would be proposing something along the lines of a townhome development. So it'd be higher density than a single family home development. That being said, I think in concept, the site would allow for 30 units under the R10 designation, but in reality, we would be site constrained to a number of units that'd be lower than 30 units. But beyond that, I'd be happy to reserve time for answering questions, and I appreciate the Planning Commission's consideration of our project, and we'd be happy to answer any questions they or the public may have.
Thank you. Now I would like to allow the public to speak. It looks like there are five people signed up to speak on this matter. And so a total of 10 minutes is allotted for those speaking in opposition.
All right, the first, yeah, okay, you're ready. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a correction. It looks like there's now 6 people that are signed up to speak.
Yeah, I have 6 people present right now.
Okay, I would like, without any objection, I'd like to add an additional 2 minutes for that 6th person. Hold on. Without any objection, I'd like to add 2 minutes for the folks speaking in opposition to be able to speak. So all 6 will have a chance to speak for 2 minutes, and we can add 2 to the applicants as well. Thank you.
All right, the first speaker we have is Andrea Winch.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. I live in front of 4301 Pleasant Grove Church Road. The entire street and surrounding neighborhoods were built to accommodate R4 and R6 zoning. Even prior rezoning cases were approved in keeping with this. Zoning case B2212 that rezoned from R4 to R6 is a prime example. The application submitted by the applicant is spot zoning and the very definition. Meaning, the applicant heard the extreme opposition of his plans for this lot. Not a single issue was resolved, nor were any conditions added to this application to ease the concerns from the neighbors. Traffic and safety are major concerns. Pleasant Grove Church Road and surrounding neighborhoods have submitted numerous requests to the city of Raleigh that have gone unanswered for more than a year. These requests are due to the number of vehicles and safety on Pleasant Grove Church Road. It's also a huge issue. I see no plans to show how this will be handled. The development behind this lot already experiences extreme issues with stormwater runoff. The only place for stormwater retention pond to drain would be into this neighborhood or a neighboring house, if there is enough room for one. If this drains into Pleasant Grove Church Road, the water would end up at the bottom of Dutch Garden Court. Before R10 could ever be approved, I would ask the commission to request plans on how this would be handled. In closing, I ask the commission to oppose the application and stand by the numerous neighbors that have written to show opposition to this rezoning. There are too many points for anyone to be able to make in 2 minutes. I ask the commission to mention those that were brought forward through email communication as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker that we have is Fidel Candle. Fidel. He is unmuted, but I'm not hearing anything. Might try to call him in while the next person speaks.
Hello, are you?
Oh, there you are. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Fidel Candel. I'm a resident of the Sunscape Townhomes community, which is situated between the 3-acre lot being discussed today. I'm also a board member of the community HOA, and I'm speaking on its behalf in opposition of the rezoning for various reasons that will negatively affect our neighborhood. Number one, the potential rezoning in the vacant lot on Pleasant Grove Church Road next to our community will allow a developer to increase the number of homes that can be built into that small space. Currently, the vacant lot is zoned as an R4, which allows 4 dwellings per acre. The proposed rezoning would make it an R10, which would increase the allowed number of dwellings to 10 per acre, which permits a major development of apartment-like buildings up to 30 units. As reference, our Sunscape community is zoned at an R6, and across the street from us is zoned in an R4. Number two, the new planned development will drastically change the natural appearance of our community, as well as introduce additional downstream flooding that would affect homeowners along Southwind Drive, Daystar Lane, and Sunscape Lane. And the reason for that is because the trees currently form a natural barrier to retain most of the water runoff. Our homes that are along Southwind Drive and down towards Sunscape have been affected by flooding in the past due to heavy rains. And many residents are extremely concerned with the additional water if too many trees are cut down due to the rezoning increase. There needs to be sufficient natural barrier to absorb most of the water runoff. And lastly, traffic off of Pleasant Grove Church Road near the back entrance to Sunscape, which comes off of Wooden Shoe Lane, is going to increase. There's a blind spot near these intersecting streets, which will only get worse with allowing 3 times as many more vehicles. Pre-COVID times, there was a long stretch along Pleasant Grove Church Road that would get filled with parked cars on either side of the street due to Sunday services. So this area gets very difficult to navigate coming into our community. So for water drainage, flooding issues, and heavy traffic caused by the number of dwellings into a small space, I respectfully request that you deny the rezoning request.
Thank you.
All right, the next speaker we have is Grayson Walker.
Hi, my name is Grayson Walker. Thank you so much for hearing our concerns. I'm a resident also of the Sunscape Townhomes community. I am speaking in opposition of this rezoning request. As a resident of a townhome that is directly south of the proposed area and downhill, I might also mention, I echo the aforementioned concerns of traffic issues, overall zoning inconsistency, and exacerbation of drainage issues we already have. And I yield the rest of my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next we have Meredith Morris. Not letting me unmute her. For some reason, I can't unmute Meredith. I might have to come back to her. So for now, the next speaker will be Robert Davis. Are you there, Robert?
Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you. We can hear you. Welcome.
Okay. Okay, I just want to concur 100% of everything that's said thus far with all the other speakers, as well as the agreement there. Most of these topics were currently already discussed, and I think each of the commissioners had received a letter of opposition, and it does view the loss of neighborhood community character, concerns of the rezoning of the property once the developer gets approved, the change of the concept. We have not received any design architectural drawings to indicate what is being developed, as well as we're concerned with spot zoning and favoritism provided to the developer by the commissioners, the traffic concerns which have already been discussed, market values of neighborhood homes, of R4 homes, single family homes, and still some contamination concerns, with slides and pictures were sent in with the letter to explain each of those slides and pictures. As well as it appears that there's an improper address on the applicant, which we assume makes it null and void. I would like to yield the rest of my time to other speakers so that they may get their oppositions across as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Sean Davis.
Hello, are you there?
Yes.
We're here and we can hear
Are you
you.
guys there? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of the woods. All right. Yeah, so my name is Sean Davis. I live right next door to the property at 4305. I've been living there for about 33 years. Pretty much all the concerns have been brought up that I wanted to talk about, but just I've got slides, and I don't know if Ray has offered those slides up of the asphalt of what the traffic has done through the years to Pleasant Grove Church Road. Like we've indicated, this is a dangerous road, and we've put in because it's a major cut through. We have no speed limit signs. It's speeding throughout the day coming from the areas. We have 7 school districts that bus in and out of this neighborhood every day before COVID. We have a preschool that at the church of over 150 students that are parent drop off to and from. And it's just the value, and it's out of character. And again, living next door, there is still contamination over there that has not been addressed. And I don't know if you guys can see my slides of the pictures that I've taken. And like I said, of the slides of all of the cracking of the road throughout the traffic issues. I'm highly opposed of and going to the runoff. I live next door, and my driveway gets flooded. My neighbor next door has to have a pump in his, not his basement, his crawl space from where the water is constantly sit there. So that is the topo of the land. The stormwater has not been addressed. This developer has not sit here and gave us any plans, has not really talked to any of the neighbors that any of our concerns. We had one slightly meeting that everybody was opposed, and that he was going to come back and talk to us. He never has. He has mentioned this is completely a profit venture for him, that he doesn't care, that he doesn't live in this neighborhood. He doesn't have to deal with the repercussions of what he builds in here. I would just highly, and as someone has already has, there is a proper address. If you look at the owner's affidavit, I can't remember, I think it's about page 22. It says that the address is 4103. So I would seriously, this is not even the address on the owner's affidavit, and I would sit there and just highly, if they can't figure this out, the application should be null and void. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
All right, I think I have Meredith on the line now. One second. Meredith Morris.
Can y'all hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I've had phone issues, so that's why I was on a computer. I actually am Sean's significant other. I live at 4305 Pleasant Grove Church Road, so I live right next door to the property. I wanted to talk to you about the traffic issues as there is a neighborhood church. My children have gone to the preschool, and walking is very dangerous, and even trying to cross the road, walking on in the neighborhood in the stroller, it is very dangerous to even cross to go across the street to walk the neighborhood. And you have people walking to the church the church normally has events daily before this COVID hit, and they can't even walk to their destinations without trying to get hit. And in fact, my children actually almost got hit the other day. So I would really highly suggest the traffic issue be into consideration for denial of putting so many homes next door of this already highly dense residential area. That is all I have to say.
Thank you very much.
That was all we had.
Okay, thank you, Ray. So I would now allow for questions and comments from commissioners. And if you have a question, to raise your hand. Commissioner Fox, before you go, I do want to ask staff about the incorrect address. Could staff address that question?
Yes, I can. So that it's correct, excuse me, that the address is listed incorrectly on an affidavit from the owner stating that they acknowledge that the property is being rezoned. And so that does need to be corrected. However, on that affidavit, the PIN for the property is correct and the description of the owner is correct. So it does appear to be a typographical error that needs to be corrected.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Bennett.
Commissioner Fox, was your question addressed? Well, because in there she had called on you first.
I had a question. I wanted to see if staff could address the traffic concerns.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett and Commissioner Fox.
Planning Commission, this is Jason Myers with the Department of Transportation. I don't know that I can address the concerns. If you have a specific question about the concerns or about the transportation system, perhaps I can provide that information.
I wanted to know if this was currently on the list of traffic calming projects and if you knew where it was in the prioritization.
Unfortunately, at this moment, I do not know. I was just trying to find that out when I was listening to the citizens' concerns. So I will try a little harder and let the commission know if I learn something.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. I have two questions. I'll start with the traffic one since we're talking about traffic. I understand no TIA was warranted by this development, and there are only 5 additional trips in the AM and PM peak, which doesn't seem significant. But there's a total of 106 new trips. Isn't that substantial for a neighborhood street?
That is, and I think there's a couple different ways to answer that question. We consider in our comprehensive plan that a neighborhood street based on basically the number of units that it should support before another neighborhood street is built parallel to it, to basically lead to about 3,000 cars a day, which is kind of the upper limit of a neighborhood street. And I do not know, though I'm very close to getting a traffic count on Pleasant Valley or Pleasant Grove Church Road. So 100 out of 3,000, that's, that's really the proportion that I think this could be evaluated to. I don't want to make the judgment call of whether that is significant. At the rezoning stage, without a specific request from Planning Commission, we're really looking at the entitlement change and what that means to the system. But of course, change is something that people are going to be often concerned about for understandable reasons.
Commissioner Bennett.
Okay, thank you for that, Jason. My second question is, why was the second neighborhood meeting not required? I noted in the staff report, it said not required for the second neighborhood meeting.
So there are specific criteria set out in the code for when the second meeting is required. Acreage is one factor, rezoning from a residential to a mixed use district, height well beyond 3 stories. This one did not meet any of those requirements for the second meeting.
Okay, thank you for that, Jason. So if I would just like to add a comment and then I'll be done. I think it always concerns me when, especially in a case like this, which seems to be so controversial and have such opposition, when there's no additional outreach to the community based on a procedure. Well, it doesn't require that we meet with them, so we're not going to meet with them. In my mind, that doesn't show a good faith effort to negotiate with the community in which you want to come. So that bothers me. With all of the email communication that we have received, I can only imagine the applicant is well aware of the opposition to this development. So to not meet with them an additional time to try to work something out, maybe they wouldn't have been able to, but to not try to work something out just kind of bothers me. So I just wanted to make that point. It would be nice if applicants would go above and beyond when it's necessary for community engagement and not just look at it as a requirement that they have to do.
Commissioner Winters.
Thank you. I have a question. There was a comment about contamination. I think a caller mentioned something about contamination, and I've been going through my notes trying to find that. Can someone speak to the issue of contamination?
That's not something that staff is aware of. Perhaps the applicant, having worked obviously with the property owner, might be able to speak to that.
Yes, can everybody hear me? This is Cliff Minsley of the applicants.
Yes, I can hear you.
I'll answer the question first about the contamination. The home that was previously on the site had an underground storage tank that during the initial due diligence when we approached the site was discovered to be leaking. And so at the current property, we do not currently own the site. The current property owner, we notified them of the concern and they elected to remediate the site themselves. So they hired a licensed professional to have the UST removed, the underground storage tank, and any and all contaminated soil that was discovered. So that occurred in the November-December timeframe. And upon finding that the extent of the contamination was reached, they applied to the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality for no further action, which was issued. And that letter was issued to the current property owner on January 4th, 2021. We, the applicant, then followed up with a updated phase 1 environmental report, which indicated that that was the only environmental concern and that it had been remediated. And then to address the other planning commissioners' comment regarding the neighborhood and the meetings, The initial meeting was held on September 23rd, and I'll be happy to share some of the comments and concerns that the neighbors had. We certainly did hear them, and we do appreciate it. And we instructed our zoning council to reach out to the folks that were most vocal about holding a second meeting, offering to hold that meeting, and we got no response.
Okay, thank you.
I might add that I think in some of not all the instances, but maybe some, despite our willingness to address some concerns, I still feel that some of the folks that are in opposition of the project are just opposed to the project in concept as a whole.
So I have a question for the applicant. I'm hearing some neighbors with concerns with their single family homes that are near this property. I know that to the south it looks like it's not single family. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to consider conditions to add, additional buffering between your property and the R4 properties that have single family homes. As well as consider prohibiting boarding house, telecommunications tower, and remote parking lot.
I am not, and this is Cliff, the applicant speaking. I would have to defer to what the current setbacks are to John Fraser of FLM Engineering. I know that this is a relatively small site, being 3 acres. And during the neighborhood meeting, and this goes in line with, I commend the city for taking sustainability initiatives. I think that's a major challenge that we face in the coming decades and want to be a part of that. And to that end, we spoke with the neighbors about preserving as much of the natural buffer as possible, given that it's indigenous and requires less maintenance and upkeep. And it seemed that that was one item that the neighbors were interested in. But with respect to buffering, I know that's a tight site, and I don't know what exactly the buffers are and how much in reality there is to give up before we just don't really have much to work with at all. But if we need specifics on the buffers, I'm sure John would be happy to share the details of that. And one other thing to add, the site does have single family homes to the west and one single family home on the east, but predominantly the single family homes are across the street. The site is bordered on the south side, and I would say approximately half of the west and east side by townhomes, which would be in line with what we're proposing for the site.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. The townhomes that are adjacent to the site are, what's the zoning? It's R6, right? Not R10, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And Ken or someone from staff online, we've heard the term spot zoning a lot. Would someone define that, please?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So one of the crucial factors, there's several factors when it comes to determining if a rezoning could be interpreted by court as spot zoning. And a key one is whether it conforms to a city's formal long-range plans for a particular area. So in this case, this would be consistent with that long-range vision as codified in the future land use map and the comprehensive plan. So given that, this would not be interpreted as a potential spot zoning. An example of a potential spot zoning would be a rezoning that isn't supported by long-range plans and is very different in kind and adjacent zoning categories. Say, for instance, an industrial site designated when all the adjacent properties were zoned and planned for residential uses.
Thank you.
Another key, just quickly, another key element is that the area around the property is uniformly zoned. And if you just look at that small portion of the zoning map that's included in most of the exhibits, you've got R4, R6, R10, RX3, and depending on the map you refer to in the presentation, you do have some CX3. So it's not really a uniform zoning in that area. And so that's another issue that's weighed in on whether someone is trying to spot zone a property.
Thanks.
I would note that we had a question for transportation previously about traffic calming, and I believe staff has had the chance to take a look at some information to provide.
Yes, this is Jason Myers again. I apologize for the delay. I was chatting with the traffic calming administrator who helped provide this information. Pleasant Grove Church Road is not currently eligible for traffic calming in the neighborhood traffic management program. It was evaluated in 2019. It did not meet the minimum score threshold to show up on that priority list at that time. What the counts at that time were just a little bit over 1,000 vehicles per day, and the 85th percentile speed, which is the speed that program uses as its primary measurement of speeding, was 37 miles an hour in a 35 mile an hour zone. And that 2 mile an hour difference is really, I believe, what that scoring is based off of. The mean and the median speed at that time were about 33 miles per hour. What Will Shoemaker, the traffic calming administrator, did tell me is that they are going through a process to have the speed limit reduced to 25 miles per hour. And if I understand correctly, that is, he's expecting that to happen. I don't know if the ballot to the property owners and neighbors in that area has already gone out and been approved, and he's just testing the winds and understands that it's likely to happen, or if that has already happened. But assuming that the 25 miles an hour is approved and happens as he says it should, the speed limit signs would go up at 25 miles an hour, and at that point the street could be reevaluated, in which case if people don't slow down because of the speed being changed, a 37 and a 25 would bring that score up quite a bit, and it was more likely to be able to qualify for that program. Does that answer the questions that the commission had about traffic calming?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, can I ask the applicant to respond? I think they had mentioned that they reached out to neighbors with no response. Can I hear a little bit more about that, just to sort of follow up to Ms. Bennett's comment as well? So I found that interesting.
Yeah, sure. This is Cliff Minsley. So we had a long, discussion on September 23rd via Zoom call, and we had some of the same folks that were participating this morning participating during that call. I won't name anybody in person unless I'm permitted to, but one was very vocal and had a lot of questions for us, and followed up with an email and said that, essentially they were expressing concern, or she was expressing concerns based on the neighborhood. And so we had a litany of questions that we answered, one of which was, will there be a second neighborhood meeting held? And this email was sent by my zoning counsel on December 3rd back to that neighbor, just pointing out that although no second neighborhood meeting was required, we'd be more than happy to host one. And we never got any response or request for that to actually happen.
And this is Molly Stewart. I'll also add, there was an active email traffic, which, at the end of our neighborhood meetings, we invite everyone to reach out, since they have our contact information there in the letter, so that we know who's interested. And we did have several neighbors reach out. We responded to each of those. I know that on occasion you were copied on those, and so you saw some of that traffic, but there was quite a bit of that. So it's not as though there weren't any further conversations as far as sort of unilaterally calling a second meeting. We didn't necessarily have anything to add, and we'd heard at the last meeting that everyone felt they had expressed what they needed to. So, given those one-on-one conversations, we felt that was being addressed.
We certainly be, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but we'd certainly be happy to forward the email, just to provide evidence that what we are saying is true. And I do, at some point, I don't know when appropriate, but would like to address some of the concerns that the neighbors brought up this morning, because some of those same concerns were brought up in the neighborhood meeting, and we discussed them. And so I'd be happy to offer the applicant's perspective on the concerns, because we are a local developer. My fiance and I live in a townhome here in Raleigh, and we recognize that there are concerns, and we want to be good neighbors. We want to do business in Raleigh, and we want to have a positive reputation.
I think we would like to hear about addressing the concerns of the neighbors, or what their concerns were.
Sure. And forgive me if there are any that I missed. I'd be happy to address any and all of them. But what I'm hearing is that there are concerns about traffic and safety. I can't really provide much on the safety concerns out along Pleasant Grove Church Road, aside to say that our development will obviously cause more traffic because it's going from a vacant use to a residential use. However, as the planning report indicated, there are only 5 additional peak trips in the morning and 5 additional peak trips in the evening. And it would appear that there'd be 106 trips daily added. And along those lines, I think that it might be notable that this really is the last remaining vacant site in this, in this span of Pleasant Grove Church Road. And so, one of the gentlemen earlier mentioned 3,000 trips was a target number of trips for a neighborhood street. And that's roughly 3.5% of total trips that we would be adding from our development. So it seems that, based on the size of the site and the amount of trips that'd be generated, it seems to be in line with what's contemplated for that type of street. I heard concerns about stormwater, and certainly recognize that is a valid concern. We would be adding impervious surface to what is currently a vacant site, but we fully intend to utilize John Fraser and his expertise. He is a licensed civil engineer, to design the site and to retain and, in a controlled manner, release any stormwater that would be added on a controlled basis. And then certainly it'd be incumbent on the builder, when the project's constructed, to retain any runoff and prevent any sort of silt from escaping the site. I heard a concern about, I think some of the other ones in regards to spot zoning were addressed. I had a concern about market values of homes. I'm going to make the assumption that the concern is that the market values of the homes in the area would decrease as a result of our development. And I don't know that there is a lot of evidence out there that, well, let me back up and say that we believe that our price point for the planned units would be as a base price between $350,000 and $400,000 per home. And I've done some research on Zillow in the recent past, and during our due diligence reviewing the site, and it would appear that that price point is consistent. It's slightly above the lower end homes, or the homes on the lower end of that spectrum, but also slightly below the home prices on the higher end of the spectrum. And I mean that with regards to homes that immediately are adjacent to this site. So I don't know that would come to pass. We certainly take pride in the work that we do, and we want to make an aesthetically appealing project. And I hope that it would contribute to the overall appeal of the neighborhood and be a good fit.
And to add to that response, this is Molly Stewart. As this commission knows, housing is desperately needed, and we need it here in the city, and wherever that's created, there will be some traffic generated. There will be some new impervious surface. We know that. We've done our best in this situation just to ensure that we're doing it where the plan calls for it. And I know you're well aware that the UDO does have strict detention requirements as far as stormwater, and we will absolutely, of course, as you heard, work with staff on that. And traffic, given this 3-acre site, the analysis that the zoning staff did or the planning staff did, really assumes the maximum development. As I understand it, we won't necessarily be able to get the complete maximum density that would be otherwise permitted under the R10 given site constraints. So that represents a high-end estimate of the kind of traffic that would be generated. So given these relatively minimal impacts for the housing, I think that's kind of the question that we're looking at today, is just kind of where do we put people in the city? And the comprehensive plan calls for here.
Thank you, Molly. I believe the final comment was, I heard a comment about school buses, and I don't know if that was in relation to traffic or school concerns, but I did some research and just generally know this being in residential development, but there are roughly 51 million students in the United States, ages K through 12, with roughly 123 million households, rendering an average, student per household of 0.12. And so at the 30, the maximum density, which again, I don't know in reality, we'd be able to build 30 townhomes on the property. I think that although that just would not be possible, but in concept, if it were, that would add an additional 12.4 students as a burden for the property. But we would certainly be happy to pay any impact or school impact fees to the extent they exist. I hope I have covered everything. Please let me know if there was anything that I missed.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Winters.
Thank you. I do recall residents talking about the blind spot. They're concerned about the blind spot. Can you address that, please?
Sure. I think that's a comment in relation to a site triangle. And we certainly are going to adhere to any site triangle requirements. And I think that there is a slight bend in Pleasant Grove Church Road right in this area. And I think we would be, to the extent that we're permitted and not cutting shrubs or bushes or trees in in an area where we shouldn't be, I think thinning out the vegetation likely could help assist in those site triangle type concerns around our specific site. But for the actual limits of those site triangles, John Fraser would really be the expert there. But I don't want to speak for the neighbors. I believe that's the concern, but I'm not certain.
So maybe transportation staff can address that a little bit more. There is a curve. If we can bring up the slide, that might illustrate it a little bit more. Pleasant Grove Church curves to the south, just east of this site. And I believe that's what the concern is referring to. And I'll Jason Myers if he wants to add any comments. So just briefly, this is again Jason Harden. Want to make sure I didn't leave any misimpression with respect to the report of contamination there. So I had seen some letters referring to that, same ones that had been sent to the Planning Commission, but I didn't have any additional information. Was not able to find that listed as a site with the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. Sounds like there was some community knowledge about some facilities on the site, and that it turned up in some due diligence work on behalf of the applicant. None of that was included with the rezoning, and in any case, if there is contamination, that would be something that, irrespective of whatever, irregardless of whatever the zoning is, would need to be addressed by any potential development.
This is Jason Myers, the Department of Transportation for the city. Yeah, there is a curve on Pleasant Grove Church just east of this site. And I have not been to the site in some time, but the requirement of developing this property is to build out the streetscape of Pleasant Grove Church, which would require putting in curb and gutter and sidewalk and street trees along the site's frontage, which would make the street a little bit wider and it would put in a landscape space and a maintained space where right now it may be a little bit more of a natural space. And that they, in doing that, if they have an access point along there, they'll have to maintain site triangles as well. So I think that maybe some of that concern will be addressed by any required improvements of any subdivision of this property. But I guess we'd have to look at it more if there's a specific question about that site.
Commissioner Winters.
Okay, thank you. Wanted to go back to what Mr. Harden said. You were going in and out. The last thing I heard was regardless. And I didn't know what you were saying after that regarding the contamination part.
Right, just the irrespective of the zoning, if there's some contamination that needs to be remedied, that would have to be remedied, whether it's zone R4, R10, or anything else. That it's not necessarily a zoning question.
Okay.
Commissioner Lampman.
I'm sorry, Shelley, did you, Commissioner Winters, did you have your question addressed?
I think when I'm sorry, not Mr. Harden, with traffic, that I was wanting to make sure with respect to what we were talking about at the citizens, if that satisfied their answer, if his answer satisfied their concern about the blind spot. I just wanted to know that. But I'm okay if we have to wait to get back to the citizens if we're talking about the talking or getting questions answered from the developer at this time.
Sorry, who is that directed at so I know who to unmute?
I don't remember the specific resident who specified it. Forgive me, I don't know the name.
While we're waiting to sort that out, could we hear from Commissioner Lampman?
Sure. If it's helpful, Ray, I think it was one of the callers, not a computer attendee. I just wanted to make a comment regarding density and the zoning surrounding this area. There were comments that this particular rezoning would not be, completely out of place to the neighborhood and surrounding areas. In my opinion, I think it's significant to point out that the RX 8 and the R10 and some of the CX zoning designations are all along Millbrook Road, which is a significantly different trafficked street. So, it's clear that Pleasant Grove Church Road definitely needs some upgrades. And I don't think that it supports the same level of traffic that is generated or supported by Millbrook to some of these other communities. So I just wanted to make that point. I think that that was significant to me.
Thank you. Commissioner Winters, did you have your hand up? No, okay. If there are no, Commissioner Fox.
I was gonna say, I'm gonna acknowledge this might not be popular because there are elements of the development proposal that I can see people aren't comfortable with, but I'm not actually finding any inconsistency with adopted policy of the city. So looking specifically at comp plan policies and the future land use map, it does support this proposal. So I'm gonna make a motion to approve Z 5020 as it is reasonable and in the public interest and consistent with the comprehensive plan, specifically policies related to compact development, infill development, and zoning for housing.
Okay, Commissioner Fox has made a motion and I'd ask for a second. Looks like Mr. O'Haver has his hand up for a second.
I'll second,
Commissioner O'Haver.
acknowledging Commissioner Bennett's comments about being proactive with the neighbors, but I will second.
To add a comment.
Those aren't my dogs. Those are not my dogs.
Not mine. I wanted to add a comment that apparently the host has received several messages from the opposition suggesting that they did not receive an offer of a second meeting. Can folks hear me? Let me say that again.
Yes.
That the host, that Ray has received several messages from the opposition that they had not received an offer for a second meeting. So anyway, I know we had a discussion about that, but I just wanted to put that there on the table. So we now have a motion by Commissioner Fox to approve this case and a second by Commissioner O'Haver. Seeing no further discussion, I will ask Shanitha. Commissioner Mann, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I've got just a quick comment or question. When is our deadline for action on this case? I don't see it in front of me. But I'm raising that point because the citizens are saying that they didn't get an opportunity for a second meeting. So I'd like to see if we can get that second meeting happening, but I also wanted to see if time would allow for that.
So our deadline is February 22nd.
Okay. And Commissioner Winters, I saw your hand.
I was going to answer your question of February 22nd.
Okay. So I just wanted to see what the thoughts were from fellow commissioners on my comments. And if we want to move forward, then that's fine. But I just wanted to see if we could allow the citizens or the community members to have that second meeting since they were unclear about that situation.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Mann. I see a thumbs up from some folks. My thumb is up too. I would like to just have a little more clarity on the case before I vote on it, or certainly in support of it. But we do have a motion on the table. So unless it's withdrawn, I think the procedure is to go ahead with that. So with that, I would ask Shanitha for a roll call.
Commissioner Bennett, how you vote?
Nay.
Commissioner Fox?
Aye.
Vice Chair Hicks?
Nay.
Commissioner Lampman?
Nay.
Commissioner Mann?
Nay.
Commissioner McIntyre, I'm sorry. Oh. Yeah. Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
And Commissioner Winters?
Nay.
So the vote is 2 ayes and 4 nays. So the motion fails. Commissioner Lampman.
Just wanted to ask if, as part of that, if the consideration is if R10 is really the necessary density for this site, is there something that's more palatable to the community and the surrounding zoning? Or a cap on the number of units per acre if the R10 zoning is, they're looking for setback requirements as a benefit to the zoning. Just wanted to offer that.
Thank you. So I guess we can either make another motion or if there's no objection, we could, well, actually, let me circle back around to the applicant. So I think what I'm hearing is that several commissioners would like to give you the opportunity to have a second meeting, as well as to maybe clarify some of the issues we've discussed today. And I'm wondering if the applicant, if you are open to taking that on, if that, or not. And timing wise, yeah, I think we should be able to make that happen, at least in terms of meeting our deadline.
Absolutely. We're happy to hold that meeting. As we said, we had offered back on December 3rd to do exactly that, and we just never heard back on the interest. So we are happy to do that now.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. So I think with that, we will just hold this case at the table until our next meeting, and we can get more information. I think there have been some requests for maybe some more specificity on buffering between the single family and R4 neighbors to your lot, whether that's specificity on how you're going to maintain the existing vegetation and landscape, or whether you're going to add a fence or planting, or there's a variety of ways that that could happen. I think we've said a second neighborhood meeting. And are there any other points, any other specifics or conditions that commissioners would like to put forth? Commissioner Winters, I'm sorry, Lankman.
I would just emphasize if there's a way to put a cap on the units per acre.
Okay, and a cap for units per acre. Okay, with that, we will move on to the next case. Thank you, everybody. The next case is item F3, case number TZZ 20. I'm sorry, let me try that again. TZZ 220. The Lakes. This is a request to amend the conditions associated with the master plan. The property is approximately 74 acres in size and is currently zoned planned development. The applicant wishes to modify building height, location of some residential units, and ground floor elevation standards in the master plan. Jason Harden will present on behalf of staff.
Good morning again. So this is similar to a rezoning. It's a text change to zoning conditions. And the existing site, you can see it now on the slide. Sandy Forks Road, just south of there, and a little bit to the west of Falls and Noose. Fairly large planned development, 74 acres. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. So, and I have a few more slides that talk about what the planned development currently permits. Generally, residential, a relatively, at least for 74 acres, limited amount of commercial space, about 35,000 square feet. You see along Falls and Noose at the intersections there, nodes of mixed use zoning right along Falls and Noose, commercial mixed use, and then office, and then essentially a transition to more residential uses here with the PD, and then further to the west and north and south. Next slide. So an aerial view of the site. So the northern, and you can see it fairly clearly from the site, northern, for the most part, section of the site, the PD, has been developed. The rest is undeveloped, and that's where the changes primarily would affect the existing plan development zoning here. So we'll walk through that. Next slide. And then some views looking into and inside of the site. So top left is from Sandy Forks Road, looking toward the site. So that's the existing developed portion of the site. Top right is on the Lakes Drive, which circles throughout the interior of the developed part of the site. And then the terminus of the lakes at the south end is in the lower left picture. And then the last lower right is looking north into the site. So that portion wooded, the developed portion developed already with apartment buildings. Next slide. So first the changes, and then I have a couple of slides that show with maps what's permitted and where the changes would take effect. But these are the only changes. So one would be to change the height limit in portions of the site, 2 sub-districts, that southern part. Existing limit, according to the PD, is 4 stories and 62 feet. The change would allow 5 stories. The changes wouldn't add any additional entitlement, residential or otherwise, but they would reallocate 75 units from one sub-district to another. Again, we'll look at this on a map in just a moment. And then the last change is to add a provision that does not require residential buildings be elevated 2 feet above the ground. So next slide, and that'll indicate again where these changes are taking place. So you can see the sub-districts A at the northern end, and then kind of going south, B, D, and E. C in green is a section that wouldn't change. That is reserved for open space or recreational uses. A, B, D, and E are where the residential development is or could go. So the height limit then would change. D and E, those sub areas could go again from 4 stories to 5 stories. And then the reallocation of units from that sub-district A to sub-district E. Next slide. And so this shows in terms of the sub-district, the changes or lack thereof. So total number of units stays unchanged at 1,500. But again, District A would go from 600 to 525, and then correspondingly E would permit 175 rather than 100. Next slide. So I've touched on most of this already. So again, the residential density unchanged at 20 units to the acre, maximum units unchanged, maximum commercial space, retail is not permitted, office and restaurant and a few personal service uses are permitted, 35,000 total square feet. No changes to setbacks either. Next slide. In terms of carbon emissions, again, much of this is not affected by the changes that are proposed, but it does permit only apartment or townhouse units. So in terms of residential units, the smaller, more efficient units, this would potentially facilitate development on the sections where there are changes proposed. So that would tend to bring down per capita carbon emissions. Next slide. And then in terms of affordability, no change obviously to supply, does not include subsidized units, permits variety of types, within walking distance of transit. And again, it would facilitate, presumably is the reason for the request, construction of more units and building types that tend to be relatively more affordable. Next slide. So in terms of plan consistency, in terms of the use, obviously it's consistent with medium density residential, which clearly envisions this density and these building types. But the future land use map categories do include height recommendations based on the context. So proximity to more frequent transit, for instance, or are they at the core of a mixed use area? But in this case, the medium density would, given its site conditions, recommend up to 4 stories. Again, the request would permit 5 stories. So it would exceed that recommended height. So partly consistent if you will, consistent in terms of use, but not height. And then the open space, you noted before that subdistrict C doesn't perfectly align with the area here shown on the future land use map as public parks and open space. It actually is not proposed to change, but given the overall site here is proposed for the text change, that pops up as an inconsistency as well. So if this were approved by City Council, then there would be changes to basically align that public parks and open space with what is provided in the PD. And on the portion of the medium density residential where 5 stories would be permitted, that would be redesignated as high density residential. So next slide. No urban form map designation. Here, next slide. So despite those inconsistencies, consistent overall with the comprehensive plan, and we'll look at the consistent policies on the next slide. So encouraging infill development, zoning for housing, so facilitating the development of more housing here, and greenhouse gas reduction given the building types involved. Next slide. And that one inconsistency pertaining to the future land use map. Next slide. So I noted that it would require, if approved, or it would trigger an automatic future land use map amendment, both to the medium density and public parks and open space areas. Next slide. And those are maps that would illustrate that. So you see the current map on the top right, which again doesn't reflect the existing plan development in terms of where that recreational and open space is. And then on the bottom map, you also see where the medium density residential would change to high density based on the height that's being requested here. Next slide. So no outstanding issues. Again, this has been on a consent agenda before, but the deadline is not until March. So there are a couple of meetings for potential action. So that's all, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any following the applicant's presentation.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Michael Birch representing the applicant. The applicant and all those in support have 10 minutes to speak.
Great. Good morning, Vice Chair Hicks. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Good morning.
Great. Thank you. So again, Michael Birch, Lone Leaf Law Partners here on behalf of the applicant. Appreciate Jason's presentation and gave a little background. Just want to emphasize that this master plan was originally approved in May of 2017. I do want to note, even though they're not any, kind of truly subsidized units or commitments as a part of the master plan, I do just want to note, I think a few of you were on at this time, but there was a commitment at the time to, there are 600 existing dwelling units on the property, and there was a commitment at the time to preserve those, and actually a commitment to spend $8 million on renovating and maintaining those units, 4 million of which had to be spent prior to a CO for a new building, and then the balance, the other 4 million, had to be spent prior to CO of more than 300 new units. I believe more than 4 million has already been spent on those units. They are kind of naturally occurring affordable housing, lower cost housing, and so I do want to just emphasize that, and nothing about this kind of very narrow text change is impacting that commitment at all, and that's kind of already underway. What we are proposing to change really relates to and is in reaction to a change in the code after this was adopted related to height, as well as just having been in the development plan process for the new development, just understanding some of the issues that have been encountered. So, and just want to emphasize again, we're not changing the overall intensity of the plan. That's maintained at 1,500 units, not changing any non-residential entitlement. and really just shifting 75 units from subdistrict B to E, again, where additional density can be accommodated. It's in that kind of more non-residential area. Related to height, the reason that we are changing height is in May 2017, when this PD was originally adopted, the maximum height and the way that height was calculated, the way that stories were calculated, all of that would have allowed for buildings split 4 stories and 5 stories. As y'all know, there have been many text changes to the height calculations, average grade calculations, all of that. But the effect of that is what could be done and developed at the time that this PD was approved could not when we initiated this. And so that's the reason for the 5 stories request. That is limited to subdistricts E and D, which again are closer to the commercial area, again, where height can be accommodated without any adverse impacts. And then the last change that we're seeking is essentially not having to comply with the ground floor elevation requirement, that the ground floor elevation of the building be 2 feet above essentially the curb line. And this is an issue that the Board of Adjustment has seen a number of requests for with these kind of multifamily apartment buildings, particularly in cases like this, where there are already kind of existing streets and existing access points that dictate the grade of the road, and where buildings are encouraged to be closer to the road, and where you have topography that it's extremely difficult to meet that standard and requires a substantial amount of grading or a substantial amount of import of new fill. And so we are asking for an exception to that already applied to the existing buildings in subdistrict B and A. And so we're applying that to the rest of the development. So with that, we think this, again, request is consistent with the comp plan policies encouraging additional housing compatible with the surrounding development. Request is certainly consistent with the original vision for this master plan when it was approved in 2017. And want to also emphasize that you know, we're not changing anything related to the park commitment that was in the original PD as well. And the issue related to the future land use map in that public park and open space, that map just was not updated and amended because we weren't doing that at the time in 2017. So that map wasn't reflected to show what was approved in 2017. So that's kind of being taken care of now with this amendment. So that's all I have, but here to answer any questions the commission may have.
Thank you. And I believe there's no one to sign up to speak on this matter, no one else. And so with that, I would allow for questions and comments from commissioners. Are there any questions or comments? Commissioner Lampman.
I have a question for staff. I just noticed that there is a utility easement with high power utility lines. I don't know what the current Raleigh guidance is on development under, around, through high powered utility lines.
That's a good question. Unless someone else is on who can give a quick answer, I'll need to take a second to check that out.
I mean, you should go ahead and check, Jason, but I don't believe we have any specific regulations, certainly not in the Unified Development Ordinance, as relates to that go beyond whatever restrictions are associated with the easement.
And this is Michael Birch. I can speak to, you know, there is an easement that is, I believe, 65 feet wide. I'll note that there's also a water line easement that is an additional 20 feet. So there's kind of that easement width of about 85 feet between districts, subdistricts D and E. Really, there's no, it is regulated by now Duke Energy. The city does not have any regulations, but Duke Energy is the easement holder. They do allow kind of perpendicular crossings by roads, but they don't allow any vertical structures. And the easement width is intended to accommodate not only the actual transmission lines themselves, but also kind of additional area outside of those transmission lines.
Okay, any additional questions or comments? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion. Please remember to be recognized before making a motion, and the motion should cite comprehensive plan consistency and include a statement why the request is reasonable and in the public interest. Commissioner Fox.
Motion to approve TCZ 220 as it is reasonable and in the public interest and consistent with the comprehensive plan, specifically policies related to infill development and zoning for housing. Additionally, this motion would amend the future land use map on the subject parcels from medium density residential to high density residential, and areas designated as public parks and open space modified to reflect open space area specified by the PD.
Commissioner Mann.
I second that motion.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Fox to approve and the second by Commissioner Mann. Seeing no further discussion, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Fox?
Aye.
Vice Chair Hicks?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Mann?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
Commissioner Winters?
Aye.
Okay, that's a unanimous and the motion passes. Thank you, everybody. The next item on the agenda is case number TC 1820. This is a staff-initiated request to modify the UDO, specifically to shift the review of stormwater variances from the City Council to the Board of Adjustment. This text change does not propose any new regulations or change in policy direction. And Justin Remetta will present on behalf of staff.
Good morning, Commissioners. Can you all hear me okay?
We can hear you. Good morning.
Okay, good morning. Thank you. Yes, I'm Justin Remetta with Planning and Development. This is case TC 1820 related to City Council and quasi-judicial matters. Next slide, please. So this text change, as you stated, does shift review authority in certain instances from the City Council to the Board of Adjustment for certain reviews and to city staff and others, which I'll go into specifics of in a second. This text change was initiated by Council at their October 20th meeting of last year after a presentation on quasi-judicial hearings from the City Attorney's Office. Next slide. So specifically, what this text change would do is moving authority from all quasi-judicial hearings away from City Council. So those hearings will go to the Board of Adjustment in the cases of variances to stormwater, erosion control, and watershed protection regulations, and appeals of administrative decisions in those matters, and would shift reviews of subdivisions in the Metro Park Overlay District from City Council to city staff. Next slide. So just a little bit of the rationale behind this change. The majority of city council decisions are legislative. Quasi-judicial hearings are unique in that they require evidentiary hearings with sworn testimony. They require due process to be followed. They do not allow for ex parte communications, meaning no communications outside the meeting itself. Very much different from how council is used to acting in say, legislative matters for a rezoning case. The Board of Adjustment, however, is uniquely suited to have these hearings simply because they have them frequently. The Board of Adjustment is responsible for variances and appeals to most other matters in the code, and they have hold quasi-judicial hearings regularly. As far as subdivisions of land in the city are all approved administratively by staff with two notable exceptions. The first is subdivisions in historic districts or of historic landmarks. Those are hearings, quasi-judicial hearings held by the Historic Development Commission. The other are these subdivisions for uses other than single unit living in the Metro Park Overlay District. All other subdivisions are already approved by staff. And again, this text change is largely procedural and just moving those back to staff and the other hearings to the Board of Adjustment. That is an overview of the text change. I'm certainly happy to go over any of the text of the draft language if the commission wishes to, or certainly happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And I would now like to allow for any questions or comments from commissioners. Okay, seeing none, I would entertain, I'd like to entertain a motion. The motion should cite comprehensive plan consistency and include a statement of why the request is reasonable and in the public interest. Okay. Commissioner Fox.
Quick question, is there a consistency statement for this one? I didn't see it in the backup.
There isn't a separate statement attached. There is language on page 2 of your staff report that should help you in crafting that.
Excellent. I had it pulled up. Just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed it. Vice Chair Hicks, if it's okay, I'll move forward with the motion.
Yes, thank you.
Motion to approve TC 1820 as it is reasonable and in the public interest. Because the majority of decisions made by City Council are legislative and the Board of Adjustment is better suited to hold quasi-judicial evidentiary hearings. And city staff has review authority for all other subdivisions except those in the Metro Park Overlay District for uses other than single unit living.
Okay, Commissioner Fox has made a motion to approve.
Real quick, Commissioner Fox, if you could just say whether it's consistent or inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, then I think your motion's spot on.
I believe I did. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
And I will second the motion. So we have a motion to approve and a second. And with that, I would ask Shanitha for a roll call.
There we go. Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Fox?
Aye.
Vice Chair Hicks?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Mann?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
Commissioner Winters?
Aye.
And the vote is unanimous and it passes. Okay. So this takes us through all the discussion items on our agenda. Next is approval of the meetings. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes. Commissioner Lampman.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes, January 12th, 2021.
Thank you. And I will second that. We have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, I'll ask Shanitha for a roll call.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Fox?
Aye.
Vice Chair Hicks?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Mann?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
And Commissioner Winters?
Aye.
The vote is unanimous and it passes. Thank you. Okay, now on to the report from the chairperson. Just a reminder that we have a committee of the whole meeting this Thursday, the 28th at 4 p.m. And also I wanted to note to commissioners that there'll be a special election at our next Planning Commission meeting. Chair Tomasulo is stepping down a little bit earlier than expected. And I roll off in March from my 6 years on the commission. So I've agreed that it makes sense to allow a new team of leaders to come on board to accommodate that change. And I believe that staff, I believe Travis will be sending out an email with some more information on that. So just have that in mind and be prepared for that at our next meeting, which is February 9th. Do we have any reports from members? Commissioner Winters.
Thank you. Just wanted to share that the strategic planning commission has been meeting. We had a great discussion on last Tuesday about the evolution of Raleigh, how we started in like 1794 and where we are now, and how Raleigh has grown, and how the lines of equity and inequity have also grown during this time. It's an interesting discussion that we're having, and it also lays the groundwork of what we see today and what we have all committed to try to address in our roles here. So I will have a more formal presentation or a more formal note at a later time, but we're still in information gathering.
Thank you, Commissioner Winters. Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. The Transportation Committee will be meeting this Thursday immediately prior to Committee of the Whole at 3 o'clock. And we're starting with the basics, just making sure everybody understands what we're talking about when we're talking about assessing traffic impacts. So before we get to specific cases or specific concerns, we're just going to try to make sure that all of the commissioners, as well as members of the public, are all on the same page in terms of some of the terminology and what's being looked at and what a TIA is and what justifies a TIA and those types of basic building blocks of the traffic assessment.
Thank you. Okay. Now on to the report of the Deputy Planning Director, or the Director.
So have some updates from the City Council, but first want to congratulate the Commission. We are finishing our meeting before the noon hour today for the first time in recent memory. And so great job to the chair and all the members for running an effective and efficient meeting today. From the last City Council meeting on January 19th, there were 5 items that have been referred to public hearing on February 2nd, and they are Z2820 on Glenwood Avenue, Z3520 on Wade Avenue, Z4020 on Hillsborough Street, Z4520 at Buffalo and New Hope. You may recall that was the case for which you had recommended denial, and TC 820, the short-term rental ordinance. Council did make some modifications to your recommendations prior to scheduling that for public hearing, that last item, the short-term rental ordinance. One item was approved at the meeting, which was Z2120. That was the rezoning at Morgan Street and Boylan Avenue. And then two items you had asked for 45-day time extensions for C4320 Trailwood and C4620 Creedmoor, both of which you discussed today. Those were granted. So as is obviously the case, otherwise you would have been unable to have them on the agenda. So that concludes my report.
Thank you. Commissioner Winters.
Hi, Ken, can you please tell us what the changes were?
Yeah, essentially they reversed your decision to draw a distinction between hosted and unhosted rentals.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no further questions, that concludes this meeting of the Planning Commission, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.